Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Empowering Children with the Courage to Trust, to Feel, to Talk. I'm just trying to, hi, Maggie. I'm going to stop. There we go.
The funny thing is Maggie is listed as Wendy Line. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure what's happening, but somehow our colleague Maggie became a panelist just by logging on. So welcome.
How many Wendy Lines are there?
Apparently, there are a lot of Wendy Lines.
I will say I forwarded her my link earlier today.
That's why. That's why.
A personal link. So, hey, Wendy.
We have double Wendy's today, but I think we're good now. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the webinar. We're super excited. I know many of you are coming to us from snowy places. I see that kind of coming in through the Q&A, well, saying hello from a snowy location. So we appreciate you being here, especially if you had a snow day today and are still logging on to get some professional development. My name is Mallory Henry. I'm a senior coordinator of student assistance programming for Caron Treatment Centers. I also oversee our regional family services, including our family webinar series, which part of that series is today. We host a monthly webinar for free of charge for families who are impacted by substance use disorder in any way. They are completely free. You do not have to have any affiliation with Caron. Every month there's a new topic, a new expert. And today we are super excited to have Wendy Line and Jerry Moe with us to talk about how children are impacted by substance use disorder within the family or within their lives. I just want to do a couple housekeeping and logistical things before we dive into content. I just want to give a shout out and a big, wonderful thank you to Lauren and Jay Springer, as well as the Berks opioid settlement funding that allowed us to have this webinar today and allow us to put it on for free of charge for individuals. So I just want to thank them for their generosity. It allows us to continue to offer programming for free, not just in Caron's backyard, but really across the world. So we're thankful for that generosity. Just a couple things upcoming in terms of family services, just so you all are aware. Our next webinar next month will be March 7th, and I will make sure to put all of this in the chat to you as well. March 7th, this will be an evening webinar from 7 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that will be ambiguous loss in families with substance use disorder with Caron's Dr. Camille St. James. She's a phenomenal speaker. It's a really interesting topic. So I encourage you to register and attend. For all of our webinars, as long as you are registered, you will receive the recording to the webinar. So if you no longer can attend live or it's too late in the evening, as long as you're registered, you will receive the recording. Caron also has a family webinar playlist on our YouTube page, which I will put in the chat, where I house all of our previous recordings. So anything and everything in terms of webinars related to family impact are included in that link that I will put in the chat. So again, if you can't register, you don't attend live, you want to see what webinars we've covered in the past, feel free to jump on that link. I always upload them there monthly, so you will see all of those webinars there. And then finally, I just want to share some in-person workshops with you. They may or may not be in your backyard, but I at least want to share them with you as an additional resource for family members. We have quite a few upcoming in-person family workshops. These are designed for family members 18 and up who have been impacted by a loved one's substance use disorder. Can be parent, spouse, sibling, could be a child as long as they're over the age of 18 for this specific workshop. We actually have one this Saturday, February 17th in the Philadelphia region. I will put all this information in the chat. We have one February 24th in the Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania region. One March 2nd in the state of Delaware, May 4th in the Washington, D.C. region, and then April 20th in the Southern Florida region. If you do not see a location that's close to you, feel free to reach out to me. We're always happy to talk about potentially hosting a workshop in your backyard if that's something you're interested in. Wendy today will also likely talk about Caron's youth education program. So I just wanted to highlight a couple workshops that are upcoming for her. Those are for children 7 to 17. So specifically the demographic we're talking about today, one of them will actually be taking place next Saturday, February 24th on Caron's campus in Berks County, Pennsylvania. So if you're joining us today and have some kiddos or children that you're thinking of that could benefit from some education, please check into that. Again, I will put that link in the chat. I just wanted you to know that was upcoming. We also have one in conjunction with our May 4th family workshop in Washington, D.C. We will hold a simultaneous youth education program. So we have something for the adults at the same time, something for the children, which is really, really great. That way everyone can leave there with some education, some community building, and some resources. So again, I will put all of that information in the chat. I will also be sending all of you that registered an email. The email will include all of the resources I just shared, everything I put in the chat, any resources that Jerry or Wendy shared today, I'll be sure to put in that email, as well as the link to the video recording. So we're going to try to hit you in lots of different ways to get you that information, because we always say at Caron here, when we know better, we can do better. So the more education and resources we can share, the better the outcomes for our children and our families. So with that, I just want to do a brief introduction of our wonderful speakers today. We will basically be, I will be moderating kind of a conversation. I'm really looking at today as a conversation in hopes that you guys can learn from some experts in this field around how to talk to kids, how to empower them, how to help them have courage to talk, and then really take away some resources today. So put some tools in that toolbox for you as you leave today on how do we work with children and families who suffer from substance use disorder within that family or within a loved one, someone they love in general. So first, I'd like to introduce Wendy Line. Wendy Line is a coordinator of student assistance and youth education programs at Caron Treatment Centers. In these roles, she leads transformative initiatives overseeing a dedicated team of individuals within our education department. Her role involves crafting impactful programming and actively engaging with children impacted by a loved one's substance use, embodying a commitment to positive change. Wendy came to Caron in 2009 as a facilitator of the youth education program before moving to the student assistance program in 2010. She started out providing direct services to school, became a lead specialist, and eventually a coordinator in the year 2021. Prior to coming to Caron, Wendy worked as an elementary school teacher in Colorado and Pennsylvania. So welcome, Wendy. And then finally, I want to introduce Jerry Moe. Jerry is a senior clinical advisor at the National Association for Children of Addiction, or NACOA, which you will learn more about today. He is the National Director of Children's Programs Emeritus at Hazelton Betty Ford. Jerry is an author, a speaker, and a consultant on issues for children and families hurt by addiction. He has spent over 4 decades working in the treatment and recovery worlds. Among his 24 books are Through a Child's Eyes, Understanding Addiction and Recovery, and the Beamer series for kids. Jerry's work is featured in the PBS documentary Lost Childhood and Emmy Award-winning programs on both Nickelodeon and Sesame Street. Welcome, Jerry.
Thank you.
So before we kind of dive in, again, I just want to, in terms of questions, we will have time at the end. We can do a live Q&A, but you do have the option to put questions in the chat as well as through the Q&A button. So feel free to do that as we go on today. The panelists can see the chat, so if you have questions throughout, you can throw it in there. They can try to weave it into what they're answering, or we can make sure to field those questions to them at the end of the presentation as well. Right. So, Jerry, I'm going to start with you. Over the years, in all of the work that you've done with children and families, I'm sure that you've heard a lot of blame and shame talk related to not just the person struggling with a substance use disorder, but the entire family. Just for me being in the field, I've heard comments like, if they truly loved their kids, they would just stop doing what they're doing. Or if they loved their children, they would take them out of the home or get them away from a father or mother who's struggling. Before we kind of talk about how to support children, can you share any insights on how family members can cope with these messages?
Sure, I'll be glad to, Mallory. But even before I start, I just want to welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. For the family members, your being here for a child, a niece or nephew, a grandchild, is an indication of how much you care about them. And for all the professionals who work with kids, and I understand where you are there in the Northeast getting slammed by snow today. So, above and beyond the call of duty, unbelievable. It's great to have you here. Mallory and Wendy, what a treat it is for me to share this with you. And it's a blessing to collaborate with Caron. Caron Treatment, particularly student assistance programs and family programs and youth education that Wendy does so incredibly well. Okay. I just hope to be a resource today. So, Mallory, you talked about something really important, and that's the blame and the shame. It's fascinating that you could have a child that's impacted by a loved one who has cancer. And I never hear any stigma directed towards someone when there's cancer in the family. Could be heart disease. And again, never hear anything about blame or shame. And you could say the same about diabetes. So, it's fascinating. We know that substance use disorder is a disease. The American Medical Association stated it was all the way back in 1955. But to this day in our country, we still don't treat it as a disease. And Mallory, you know that so many people with this substance use disorder face an incredible amount of stigma of their own.
Mm-hmm.
And you have people in recovery that have been in recovery for a long period of time who choose to keep that private. And it's their recovery, so they can choose. But often keeping it private because of the stigma that's out there. But you're really beginning to address something that's fascinating. And it's this, that we never talk enough about the stigma that family members face, the stigma that children face as a result of having someone they love in their family with a substance use disorder. And so where does that start? Well, if you're a family member, joining us today, where it starts is with you taking good care of yourself. Because this is a family disease and everybody gets impacted by it, including children. In my experience, is a lot of boys and girls lean on that person in the family that doesn't have a substance use disorder as their rock, as the person that they can really, rely on. And what's fascinating, here it is. Here's a webinar. We're doing a webinar. Wendy and I are sharing a webinar about empowering children. And isn't it ironic that the first thing I say is, no, you need to take good care of yourself first?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'll tell you, and I think this is true for the teachers and the counselors and the child welfare workers and children's protective services and law enforcement, everybody that's here too because they love kids. If we want boys and girls to have the courage to talk, to trust, and to feel, we need to have the courage as grown-ups to talk and to trust and to feel and to be role models. It's a disease of isolation and silence and secrecy, shame. We talked about the stigma. So today, let's break that silence. Today, let's talk about this. Let's unpack this and give you some skills and some tools and really a message of hope. Because both what Wendy and I are going to say is we know that we can help young people develop skills and tools and hear important messages that can change their lives, even if the person they love continues to be mired in their substance use disorder.
Thank you, Jerry, for that. Wendy, do you have anything to add to that? I think Jerry did a great job, but I love the concept of taking care of yourself. I think we hear that so often, and it's easy to hear it. It's a whole nother thing to do it. So I think it's no matter how many times we hear it, I think we can keep hearing it over and over and over again.
No, I think he summed it up pretty well. I think, unfortunately, our children are, it's like a self-taught rule where they don't talk, they don't trust, they don't feel, because they don't have someone encouraging them to, go around all of that, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, that's something that necessarily comes naturally to us as we grow up, to share those feelings just culturally.
Mhm.
Thank you. So Jerry, I've also heard that there is kind of becomes an unspoken rule that could be learned by children, like Wendy just referenced, especially children dealing with substance use in the family. And, the rule is don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. Can you explain a little bit what that really means for kids or what that might look like?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. We need to always look at this from 3 generations. And the reason I say that, and I bet you, Wendy, we haven't talked about this. I bet you've seen this as well, in that so many of the parents of the children who come to, let's say they come to youth education at Caron. I get that program coming up real quick. My experience anyway, clinically, is a disproportionate number of those adults also grew up in homes with substance use disorder. And I often think about them as being yesterday's children that no one helped. So this idea of don't talk, I would suggest, has been in families generationally. This isn't something brand new. We pass that along. And in some ways, addiction, and I prefer, I'll tell you, I prefer the term addiction just because I work for so long with kids. Just substance use disorder, they're going to look at you like you're from a different planet. Come on, it's addiction, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but it's the secret everybody knows. I mean, everybody around knows this is going on, and no one's talking about it. And often when children participate and siblings participate, they will tell us they never talked about it. And so don't talk. We don't talk about it. We don't trust. We learn, that we can't trust because of the inconsistency and the unpredictability, and you never know what's going to happen next. And when I was still working in treatment, what I would tell people in treatment for a substance use disorder, that I think the biggest tragedy of it is that when a person is in it, they cannot consistently love the people who mean the most to them, because that awful disease keeps getting in the way. And so kids learn not to trust and then to not feel their feelings. And so again, to set something up for family members, because if you want to help kids, help yourself. And there we go back to the same thing. But I believe that, for the people watching today, learn all you can about substance use disorders. Books, webinars such as this, ask experts, go to a counselor, learn about substance use disorder, the true nature of it. I don't think most people in America understand it, quite honestly. That's why there's the shame and the stigma, because they don't understand it. But the more as a grandparent I can learn about this, the better I am able to communicate it with my kids. And just a couple of other things. If we want to get kids to talk, trust, and feel, we need to create a safe place. So when Wendy's doing youth education at Caron, she creates a safe place. That's what allows kids to be able to do that. And it's structure and it's consistency. And it's funny at home, structure and consistency amidst the chaos and unpredictability. But it's being able for families to create safety, to have dinner, to celebrate holidays and birthdays and rites of passage and rituals, even if the person with a substance use disorder is not participating in all of that. To be able to do that, and then to be able to learn how to talk to kids in ways that are age appropriate. If I could put it in one sentence, Mallory, because one size doesn't fit all. Every situation is different, and I believe needs to be approached differently. But what I always want to do with kids as young as 5 and kids all the way to 17, is I want to be able to give them enough information that validates what they know, so it makes sense. Okay, that's why mom stays out all night. Okay, that's why dad can't get off the couch over the weekend. Okay, that's why there's all these promises that get broken. I want to validate what they know, on this edge of validating and yet not giving them any more, because in the name of helping them, I never want to confuse them or overwhelm them. And so often in families, let me just make a couple more points and I'll stop. Often in families, I see extremes. I see extremes where we don't say anything at all to the kids. And I'll tell you, I one time had a 6-year-old tell me how to make methamphetamine.
Mhm.
And she was right. I
Mhm.
think sometimes in families with addiction, we don't give kids enough for credit for knowing what's going on in the family system. And they might not know it's alcohol. They might not know it's drugs to begin with, but they know something's wrong
Mhm.
because the very people in their life that they adore, that they care about, just aren't able to care for them in a consistent way. And so you can't just not say anything.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
often, when kids are told a little bit by a parent, a grandparent, often an initial response is, "Well, what else don't I know? Why haven't you told me this stuff?" And they're angry, and they have a right to be. And so
Mhm.
we want to kind of reassure them and give them that. And then the other extreme is we tell them everything. We're talking about, well, this is the kind of drugs they're using, and this is what they're doing. And, it's like, no, 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 no. Share and we do this. Teachers and group facilitators, we do this as well. Give them little bits of information. Share just a little bit. Help them to digest what they have. Let's see if they have any questions. Let's give them a couple of days to see if there's any dialogue
Mhm.
that they want to share. I have a dear friend, singer-songwriter, sometimes on Disney Channel, and he wrote a song called "How Do You Eat an Elephant?" It's the name of the song. How do you eat an elephant? And the chorus is one bite at a time. And so my suggestion is just a bite at a time, a step at a time, a day at a time. So those are some of the things that we're up against here today. Wendy, bail me out. Talk about what I missed.
No, I've had very similar experiences. And one of my favorite roles at Caron that I've been doing this year is participating in the adult program on campus and participating in one of the adult resources. And it's a parenting group for patients who have children at home. And so it's a question that I always get. It's always a question about like, how much do I tell? What do I tell? How old can I start talking to my child about these things? And most parents are usually with the mindset of they don't want to have that conversation because they feel like their kids don't know anything. And so they shouldn't start that conversation with them because they don't want to give them knowledge that they don't need. But I've found that, kids they're smart, right? And if we don't give them bits and pieces of information, they end up making up far worse scenarios in their mind, things that aren't true at all, right? So we want to make sure we're giving them the information that they need that's age appropriate for them.
Mhm. I love that point, Wendy, because I see someone put in the chat, right? What that kind of making up stories in their head could be that they're at fault, right? That this is their fault. If they would have done something differently, in my work with kids, I've seen it. I've heard kids say to me, like, if I would have just been a better kid, my parents wouldn't have struggled, right? I had a child say to me, if I would have just been able to sleep in my own bed when I was younger, right? That is the story she was telling herself from the age of, young childhood to she was a senior in high school, that's the story that was in her head for that many years. If I would have just done something differently. Right. And yeah, I think, we'll definitely share some resources as this goes on, but that's a reality. And like you said, I think it's really important to trust in kids' intelligence and that they are human beings and that they're very self-aware and intuitive, a lot more than I think we culturally give them credit for. I'll share a story. I was up on Caron's campus doing the family education program a couple months ago, and there was a grandmother who was currently in treatment, and her daughter and a son-in-law were there getting some education for themselves. And she had brought a letter to give to her mother from her 9-year-old son. And she was debating opening it before she gave it to her. And she did. She opened it and we were all looking at it together. I was sitting next to them, and it was a drawing of his grandmother in a hospital bed, because they had told them that grandmother was in the hospital. That was all they shared with them. They didn't think he knew anything. And the little boy had drawn a doctor standing next to the grandma with like a bubble over its head with a wine glass with an X through it. And so that mom, in that moment, I saw her, be like, he knows, he is aware that, grandma is a different person, and grandma's struggling. And, now, right, where does that trust come if he's been told, she's somewhere that she's actually not? Or what stories is he making up in terms of being safe or unsafe, or grandma being safe or unsafe? So I think it's just really important to trust in, those children, like you guys said. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Hey, Mallory, can I throw just something
Please.
in that
Please.
both you and Wendy said, and I'll keep it brief. So Wendy, like you, I was often meeting with people in treatment and seeing, do your kids know where you are? What did you tell them? And here's a wonderful program for them to participate in. And there was a woman that says, nope, 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 no, I'm not telling them anything. They're just little kids. I'm not going to take away their childhood. And we went back and forth. And again, I met her where she was at, and she ended up coming back at the end of the day. And she looked at me and sat across from me in my office and started to cry. And she said, I'm scared. I am so scared right now. Okay, it's all right to be scared. What are you scared of? I'm afraid what they're going to think of me when I tell them that I have addiction, that addiction trapped me. And I'm afraid if I tell them these things, are they going to love me? Are they still going to care about me? So it's like we said, it's that talk, trust, and feel across the board. And then I recall, to back up what Wendy's saying, there was a boy who was about 10 years old, and he came to the children's program, right? And he was the first one there. And he's just looking around and watching everything, and no one else showed up. And he said to me, are you going to see, because his mom was in treatment, he said, are you going to see my mom today? And I said, well, I don't know. I'm going to be hanging with you all day. Maybe I can see her at the end of the day. He said, will you see her? I want you to tell her something. And I said, sure. What do you want me to tell her? And then he starts crying. And he said, would you please tell her I'm sorry? I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I stressed her out so much that now she drinks alcohol and takes medicine, which was dad in a real age appropriate, told him about that part. And he says, when you see her, would you please tell her that I'm going to be a better kid? I'm going to work on being a better kid. So think about those two examples. There's the mom and there's the little boy. And there's the multi-generational cycle of addiction and trauma that's enveloped all of them. So they all need to be treated with kindness and love and safety. And everybody in this family needs to learn to talk and to trust and to feel.
Yeah. I think that's a great kind of segue in that, one of the things I think that especially generationally families learn is these defense mechanisms that protect them, right? Like we develop these things to protect us from emotions or psychologically. Wendy, can you talk about some potential long-term challenges or risks, for kids who grow up without any kind of interventions, right? I think of that little boy sitting in front of Jerry. If he wasn't sitting in front of Jerry, right? What could we see if he didn't have that support and intervention?
Yeah. So I knew you were going to ask this question, and I have to be honest, I have a love-hate relationship with this question, simply because I know that this question might induce a lot of uncomfortable feelings with people listening today. And I understand that, and it's certainly not my intention by talking about it. But kind of like what you said earlier, when we know better, we do better. And having knowledge is super powerful. So I'm hoping by actually talking about this question, it will encourage people to get interventions much sooner, which will hopefully change the trajectory of these long-term challenges. But you're right. Oftentimes defense mechanisms are used, right? And while they can work and they can provide some short-term emotional protection, we also know that if we rely on them without any sort of interventions or supports, that's when it leads to the long-term challenges. One of the biggest long-term challenges that I've noticed is trouble forming healthy relationships. And if you think about it, it makes perfect sense, right? Relationships are built on the foundation of trust and communication. And unfortunately, the children, when they're using defense mechanisms, they've taught themselves to avoid both those things, right? So they're unable to form healthy relationships, and then they gravitate towards unhealthy ones. Depression, anxiety, and other disorders are very common. Kids are bottling up their feelings for so long that they end up having really low self-esteem, which contributes to all of those things. I think the general thing of like coping, like they have trouble coping with stress or stressful situations, right? Coping with their own challenges, maybe even coping with what they thought their life should be and what it is right now because of never having any supports or interventions.
Mhm.
And I just think that all of those challenges are the reason it's so important to intervene as early as possible. And the good thing about this question is we also know that early intervention works. So there are things that we can do to help this.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. Would you mind, Wendy, speaking of kind of those outcomes, have you seen, and Jerry, you can chime in on this too, specific examples of children who have received support through various interventions and what that can look like if we intervene early?
So I'll just give one example. And I think part of doing the youth education program that I love the most is that I feel like I always learn something just as much as the kids learn each and every program. Like I feel like I always walk away with something and I'm like, oh my goodness, wow, that was very insightful. So a program that I did recently, the families were dropping off the kids and the one family showed up and it happened to be their daughter's birthday.
Mm.
And as you can imagine, she probably didn't want to spend her birthday with me. So there was some reluctance to her coming to the program, and there were some feelings there that probably weren't the greatest at the time. But she was wonderful, and she was just so encouraging to everyone else, regardless of what was going on. And we were doing an activity around feelings. And we were choosing feelings and talking about ways that we resonate with those feelings and maybe times that made us feel certain ways. And she chose to talk about the feeling word proud. And I guess because I was doing the program for so long, I kind of like just figured she was going to say like she was proud of her parent for finally getting the help that he needed. But what she said actually gave me goosebumps. She said, I'm really proud that my dad realized that I need help. I'm
Mm.
proud that my dad brought me here, even though it's my birthday.
Mm.
Um, and it's something that's really stuck with me because in that moment where she could have been anywhere else on her birthday, doing so many fun things with her friends, she was so proud that she was there getting help for herself. And it just proves that it's so needed, it's so warranted, and every single family member needs their own individualized help.
Yeah, I love that. So even if there is some feelings, right? I think sometimes, yeah, it might not be a first choice for children
Right.
to give up a Saturday or their birthday nonetheless. But it's amazing that feeling, that sense of safety, like you guys both talked about in that room, she was able to verbalize and really sit, I think, probably and be aware of the feeling she was feeling that maybe changed
Yeah.
from when she first got dropped off. Yeah, I love that. Jerry, can you think of I'm sure you have a lot of situations in your long-standing career working with kids, but does anything stick out in terms of children who've received these interventions?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And let me tie it into another long-term effect that Wendy was talking about. And, somebody put in the chat earlier, and I thank that person for doing that. So just another long-term effect is that when kids experience trauma in their lives, and there's many traumas out there, and we're not talking enough, I don't believe, about just the trauma of the pandemic and the isolation that went with that. But beyond that, though. So when kids experience trauma in their lives and nobody explains it to them in an age appropriate way, kids make up a story for it all to make sense.
Mm-hmm.
And believe it or not, many of the stories they make up are even worse than the conditions they're living in, which are not good to begin with.
Yeah.
But they all tend to be egocentric. So why? Developmentally, little kids see themselves as being the hub of the universe. So everything revolves around them. And so you hear things like, it's my fault. I'm not okay. I can't make this better. And and sometimes kids will say in a children's program, kids will get frustrated, older kids, and say, "What's wrong with me?"
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the right question. The right question is, what happened to me?
Mm-hmm.
And I think if kids don't have an opportunity to do youth education, go through a children's program, and families don't get well, kids will carry that trauma with them
Mm-hmm.
and always feel unworthy and not good enough, and maybe always trying to overcompensate,
Mm-hmm.
or turning to all kind of ways of medicating. But it's just that not treating oneself in a kind and gentle way can be another long-term effect that can go on. And so a story connected to this. There was a man in treatment, and I was doing a lecture for everybody in treatment, and it's a lecture called Changing the Family Legacy. Because when people are in treatment, I don't need to tell them that their diseases hurt their kids. They know that. Wendy would never do that. We know that. And so this was, hey, let's look at a way out, and let's think about hope, and what are some solutions in all of this. So the guy got hit really hard by the lecture. Everybody left. He's sitting in his chair. I went to talk to him, and he looked at me and said, "I want to thank you for contributing to the worst day of my life." I kid you, that's what he said. And then he went on to say that he'd been in treatment 17 days, and he was at the doctor early in the morning, and he's got liver disease, and it's pretty serious. And he's got a daughter who he has not been connecting with for a couple of years. And he said, "We need to get her to the program. We need to get her here somehow. All right, whatever you need to do." And that was not easy, but we got her to the program. And, she walked in that first morning, and I don't know if the dad was more nervous than I was, but this beautiful, just turned 13-year-old saw her dad, walked across the room, hugged him, kissed him, and said, "Oh, Dad, I missed you. I missed you." What was fascinating, all throughout the program, she couldn't talk. And it wasn't that she wasn't interested, it's that her emotions would grab her. And we're getting to graduation, and Dad walks in. So all the kids are there, and family members are there. And all of a sudden she stands up and says to everybody, "That's my dad. That's my father. He got trapped by addiction, but it's not my fault." And he stops in his tracks, and she says, "And Dad, your daddy died of this when you were a little boy, and you won't talk about it." And she went across the room and she hugged him. And you could hear her whisper in his ear and say, "I just thought you didn't love me anymore. But now I understand." And that's why teaching kids about this awful disease, building their skills, giving them a place where they belong is so critical. And that's why these programs are so important.
Yep. Love that.
Yeah, I love that too. I think one of the things you said, Jerry, that really stuck out with me, which I think is a really tangible item that people can take, is just reframing that language of what's wrong with you. And I think we say, as parents, as educators, as people working with kids, it might be something going on in our head, right? What is wrong with this situation? What is wrong with this behavior? What is, instead reframing that to what happened to trigger this behavior? What happened to cause this response? What happened to this, not just this child, but this family? I love the concept of family legacy, because so often we work with kids who it's generational, right? And maybe we didn't have we had the diagnosis, but maybe not a title, maybe not as much access to treatment, not talking about it as much, that I think we see a lot of realization of, wow, I was this kid, right? I was this child in my own home, and now my child, is seeing this. But that reframing that in what's wrong to what's happened, I think is just so powerful, and really just a key takeaway. If you can put that in your back pocket and take it with you, that anytime you have a child in front of you, just saying, what happened? What happened? What's going on? Once you create that safe space, I think is just so easy. Easier said than done, probably, but an easy, tangible takeaway. So thank you for that, Jerry. Could you share with us too, Jerry, some key strategies? I think you've mentioned a few, but maybe really putting them in tangible terms that, things that you share with family members who are trying to support their children, or people who love someone struggling with a substance use disorder. What are some strategies?
Let me share a couple of them, and I know Wendy has a bunch too.
Mm-hmm.
When I would meet with a parent in treatment, or maybe it is a parent that's actually in family program because someone they love is in treatment, and they begin to tell me that their kids haven't been impacted by what's gone on at home. And, when I was young, and that was a long time ago, I'd want to debate you on that. I'd say, what do you mean they haven't? And you know what? And that's getting me nowhere. And so, I always flip it to talking about prevention. So, we know this sometimes tends to run in families. What a great gift to give your kids an opportunity to do this. And sometimes I take it a step further and say, wow, you know what you're doing right now? You're giving your child the gift you'd have given anything to get when you were a little kid. And that's a safe place to heal and really honor that parent. They're breaking that multi-generational cycle. And that is such a huge deal that not enough people get, unfortunately. So that's one thing. I'll make two other points and stop. So when we talk about addiction, I like to use 3 words with kids that mean addiction, that are simple. So the first word is stuck. We say people get stuck to the disease. And we go through a thing and say, hey, ever get gum in your hair? How difficult is it to get gum out of your hair? You can't. You work it. You can't do it. Second word is hooked. Like a fish gets hooked. Fish gets hooked in the water. Fish is going to spend the rest of its life trying to get free, trying to get away, trying to fight that hook, and not necessarily thinking so much about anything or anybody else. And the third word is trapped. We tell a story about a mama bear that gets trapped. Its leg is in a trap, and that's the focus, and it's hurtful. It's all encompassing to focus on that. And that's why those baby cubs might not be getting the love and attention they so desperately need. So those words are all good analogies. I think the other thing, and last point, the other thing that I always try to do with kids is try to separate the person. So this could be a mom or a dad. It could be my older sibling. It could be a grandparent. How to separate that person from the disease that goes like this. Because the kids see the disease. You can see little bits of the person. That person's filled with beauty and goodness. Most of them are. The great, almost all of them. But they see this. And I want to separate those two, because what took me a while to figure out is when you ask a child, tell me about dad's drinking, or tell me about your brother smoking marijuana every day. Tell me about mom's use of pain medication. In essence, I'm asking them to betray and be disloyal to the very people that they love. Yeah. And so switch that, and then have them talk about the disease. And you think about it, this is a disease that takes the whole family hostage. The whole family is hostage. The family is truly our patient. And we need more treatment centers where we look at it that way, with great family and youth education programs, like Caron is. So let's tell on the disease. And by the way, the disease loves it when we're quiet, when we don't have a voice. That's the beginning of that healing process, that talking and trusting. Yeah. So I'll leave it right there.
Absolutely. I love that. And I see in the chat people saying like, yeah, we can't just support someone who's sick. We need to support the entire family. I love that concept of holding the whole family hostage. I speak a lot about siblings. My brother is a person in recovery, and I talk a lot about what that looks like in terms of how do we educate siblings, right? And whether that's an adult or a child, they're still impacted by that, whether you think that they know it or not. So I love that. And one thing that resonated with me, Jerry, that you said that I think is so important, and language that I think can be age appropriate really tangibly, is this is not about a bad person trying to be good. this is about a sick person trying to get better, right? And reframing that, because I think so often kids will say like, you know, my dad or mom or sibling is making bad choices. They're a bad person, right? They're, you know, potentially incarcerated, or they've had bad situations, or people keep telling me that they're bad, or there's this untold secret that they're bad. And reframing that for kids that they're not bad, right? They might have made a mistake or some bad choices, but that doesn't make them a bad person. They're a sick person trying to get well, right? And getting well is incredibly challenging. It is a very hard thing to get well. Like you said, when this disease loves silence, it loves suppressing emotions, it loves not being talked about. So I think that's another really great way to say that. Thank you for that, Jerry. Wendy, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just add that I think, and Jerry said some of this already, but to hear it again is even better. Um, I just think the best thing that we can offer our children is to provide that safe space for them to come and talk. And when we're talking about that, I feel like we just really need to listen to them. And when I say listen, I mean like really listening, like putting down our cell phones and any other distractions that might be in the way of that moment, and listening with our ears, listening with our eyes, if that makes sense, right? Being mindful of their facial expressions, being mindful of their body language and how they're moving when they're telling us these stories, because that's really important too. And validating them for talking, validating them for feeling, validating their perspective without imposing our own perspective, because that's something that a lot of people tend to do too. And really just validating them for expressing themselves at all, encouraging them and empowering them to continue to open up as best as they can, empowering them to like express themselves no matter what they decide to express themselves, whether it's through dance or through sports or through art. I think one of my favorite ways to encourage kids to talk is through art. And we do a lot of that in the youth education program and the other supports that we offer kids. An activity that I love doing with children. And I've actually, oddly enough, well, not oddly enough, but one of the things that I've been doing with the parenting group on campus is taking the actual activities that I do with the children in the youth education program and not just telling them about the activities, not just showing them the activities, but have them doing some of the same activities that the kids do. And that's been really powerful. But one of the activities that I love doing that is such a great way to kind of open up the conversation about feelings and how kids are feeling about certain topics is something that we call Color Your Heart. And basically, we just give them a sheet of paper with an outline of a heart on it. And I ask them to color code their feeling words. So like blue could be sad and red could be angry, yellow might be happy, so on and so on. And then I just ask them to color their hearts in a way that is telling of how they're feeling. Like if you're feeling a lot of anger, put a lot of red in there. And not only do you have like this beautiful masterpiece when they're done because it's beautiful, but it's a way to start opening up the conversation of how they're feeling, right? Like I noticed like you have a lot of red. It looks like you're feeling really angry towards things. Like what kinds of things are making you feel that way? You know, it looks like you're proud of some things too. Like what moments make you proud? What things make you proud? That has been really helpful for the kids. It's been helpful for the patients on campus. It's just a great way of talking through feelings and things that people can do at home. Like if you're listening and you're looking for an activity to start that conversation with your kids, there you go. Start with that.
I love that. I love that too, because I think one of the things you were both speaking on that I think is really important is that often as adults, we skirt around questions or we don't ask specific questions because our own response is discomfort, right? If we're scared of what's potentially going to come out of it, so we kind of beat around the bush a little bit, if you will, because we're uncomfortable. And I think you know, acknowledging that. I think it's okay to say like, this is an uncomfortable topic and it's hard to talk about feelings, right? It's hard to do that. But then, like you said, that validation is so key. Just thank you for sharing that with me. You know, I appreciate you telling me that because I think a lot of times kids get messages, even in families that don't suffer from substance use disorder, that certain feelings are bad, right? That you can't feel angry, you can't feel sad, you're not supposed to feel jealous. You know, and I always kind of think like that's going to be a really tough life if we think that you can never feel those things, because we all do. We all feel jealous or angry. We've just potentially grown into learning how to handle those uncomfortable feelings in a more appropriate manner, but they're valid feelings, right? And it's okay for me to feel angry. It's okay for me to be jealous. The feeling is always valid. So even just saying to kids, like, whatever you're feeling is valid. I'm not going to tell you it's not, because I think a lot of times, again, they get these subtle messages that certain feelings aren't okay to feel. And we can really pretty easily reframe that in just saying, whatever you're feeling is valid. Yeah, I love that.
It's also a great way. So when they do start talking about their feelings, it helps you to encourage them to participate in other things.
Yeah.
That's when you can start the conversation about maybe joining a support group, or maybe they want some therapy or other support programs. Maybe that's when you talk about the youth education program.
Yeah.
You know, and for older kids, asking them, what kind of supports do you want? You know, not putting your supports on them, but letting them have some autonomy, letting them make some decisions about what will be helpful for them.
I love that. I think giving back some control, right, is kind of what you're saying, right? Especially in a situation or a family system where they feel like there's a lot out of their control, like Jerry was talking about earlier. You know, if we can give them some onus of control of, you know, it's kind of like that parenting 101. We give them two choices, but we're okay with both of them. So we let them think like they have the final call, right? Would you like to take a bath now, or would you like to take a bath in 5 minutes, right? They have to take a bath nonetheless, but we're giving them a choice, right? And can we give them some choices? Would you like to do this, or would you like to do this? Would you be more comfortable talking to me or a therapist? Would you be more comfortable going to the youth education program on your birthday or another Saturday, right? Like, we're still giving them options, but giving them a little bit of a sense of control, I think, is really powerful. And like you said, Wendy, I love the idea of having family members do the same activities. I think this is great for our school professionals on this call, because I think a lot of times things happen in schools and we don't always necessarily do the same things at home, right? So maybe students are getting some curriculum around social emotional learning in school, but how are we translating that at home? And someone said, what a great Valentine's Day activity you just gave us, of, you know, just sitting at the table with our family with a heart saying, let's talk about feelings. I actually literally just this morning printed out little hearts that had a feeling word attached to them. And it was just a Valentine's Day activity to do with family members that said, color the heart, you know, or draw the face of what that feeling would look like. So yeah, you guys all have an excuse now to go home tonight, or open that door to your office or wherever you're hiding from your kids right now if they're home, to say, you know, hey, I heard about this. I'd love to do this together as a family, just to start that conversation that feelings are okay. You know, I love that. Just, you know, coloring can be an invitation to say that feelings are all okay in this house, and we're going to start talking about them.
Yeah.
Love that. Wendy, can you talk about any other potential, you know, I see in the chat quite often, like, we really need resources, we need recommendations. So let's get to some hard, some stuff that's real tangible. What are some recommendations or resources that you can offer to family members on this journey?
Yeah, I think Jerry already kind of spoke about this a little bit, but the first thing I always tell them is to start with themselves. As a parent or other caregiver, it's hard to hear that, to start with yourself, because I think your first instinct as a parent is to help your child first, right? You want to protect them, you want to take care of them. And I get that and I understand that. But what I can say is, by helping yourself, you can better help your children later on. So educating yourself the best that you can and learning about all the different resources that are available to both you and your family. Exploring organizations like NACOA, SAMHSA, Caron, Sesame Street, and communities. I'm not going to steal Jerry's thunder on this because this is his baby.
Do it.
I know he has a lot more to talk about with that, but that is a resource that I turn to all the time when I'm working with families. I'll talk about Caron for a second because I'm most familiar with our resources, but Caron specifically offers tons of podcasts and webinars, short videos, online, in-person programs, which are designed for this specific topic, right? Our youth education program in particular is designed to help children kind of navigate substance use disorders and help them understand that they matter. It helps them to realize that they're deserving to get help too. And the program in itself, it educates them. It teaches them really important skills, decision-making skills, coping skills, resiliency skills, and it educates and teaches them that they're not alone. It offers connection and support, and that's what our children really need, the connection and support, if nothing else. Some other great resources would be Al-Anon and Alateen. Again, each person in the family deserves to get the support that they need. They don't just need it, they deserve it. For school-age children, I say reach out to your school counselors. Inquire about the different support groups that are offered at school. They don't have to be substance use specific groups, right? Sometimes kids need something different. Sometimes kids need more. Seek mental health services if needed. I think the best way to support is to just provide access. I think access is the most important thing because the truth of the matter is that kids can't do it on their own, especially young kids.
Yeah.
I mean, I think older kids have a lot more, ways and resources to do it on their own, but little kids can't. So we need to provide the access for them to do all these things. And to me, that's the most important part.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the concept. And I see, some things in the chat too. I love the concept of helping yourself. We can say it again. I'm going to say it 17 times throughout this webinar. It doesn't make it any easier necessarily, but if we're taking care of ourselves, we're mirroring to our children and children around us how important our own self-care is, and that it's hard to give right from an empty bucket. I have to fill up my own bucket first, and someone mentioned breathing techniques, right? Even just, even with my own children, I can feel myself escalating, right? It all happens, right? But if we can in that moment say, I need a deep breath, I need to take a minute, I need to step away, what is that doing is mirroring that I need a pause, right? And can we teach kids those breathing techniques, or that it's okay to say I need a break, or hey, I need to just think about this for a second, and allowing that to be okay, I think is really, really important. Jerry, what resources sorry, Wendy, go ahead. Were you going to add another thing?
No, I was just going to say, I think the most important thing we can teach them is that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to ask for help in many different areas. It doesn't even have to be about this specific topic. Like you said, mindfulness, right? Maybe they just need a mindful minute. Maybe they just need time to focus on something else other than what's going on in their families.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that. Jerry, will you also share? Wendy saved your thunder for you. But can you also?
No, she didn't. She did not do that.
I couldn't do it, Jerry. I wanted to talk
come
so
on,
much
Wendy.
more about it.
We have
how I feel about you.
Yes, we have to share your amazing resources. But can you share some resources, Jerry? And specifically, someone asked, can you explain what NACOA is specifically?
Oh yeah, sure. I'll be glad to.
That
was one of them.
Perfect.
But even before I do that, I tell you, you two just got my brain flying in about 3,000 directions right now. So let me just make a statement before resources that I think is really important. And Wendy said it. Wendy, you said it so well, and that is, as a children's therapist, the best thing I can do is build relationship. So I need to build a relationship with people in treatment. I need to build a relationship with that mom who's coming to family program, who has no one in treatment, but wants to make things different for her family. And let's remember that we're trying to build a relationship with people who have learned not to trust. And so we need to be kind and caring and informative and meet them where they're at, and not push too hard in all of that. But it's developing that relationship. And as Wendy said, letting them know it's okay to ask for help. So, it's okay for that grandmother who is asked by the 11-year-old that's just gone through youth education at Caron a really difficult question. It's perfectly okay for that grandma to learn that, let me think about that overnight. Yeah. And we'll sit down tomorrow when you get home from school, and I'll have an answer for you. And so important that we teach families, as you said, Mallory, a person with a substance use disorder is not a bad person. It's a sick person. So please never be derogatory to that person. While you talk about wanting to hurt a child, be derogatory toward their parent. You know, they have an illness, and the enemy in all of this is the disease, because it just captures all of us. Okay, enough about that. I want to share 3 resources. One is Sesame Street. Sesame Street Parental Addiction Initiative. And so Sesame Street in 2019 created a whole dedicated website for professionals, for recovering parents. Why for recovering parents? So they can learn how to talk to their kids about what's going on with addiction and with recovery, talking about the good news about that, but also for parents and caregivers. And incredible. You will meet a Muppet named Carly. And Carly is 6.5 years old. And Carly's mommy is about to come home from treatment. And Carly is excited, and she's worried, and she's scared. And just as this morning, we talked about how one size does not fit all. You know, sometimes parents don't want to use the A word, the addiction word. They don't think little kids are ready for it. Well, that first video that you'll see on the website is Carly with Elmo. And what Carly says is, you know, my mom, she needs help because she hasn't been taking good care of herself, which can be a really good initial response. Look on the website, you'll also see Elmo and his dad, Louie, coming up with a definition of what addiction is. And what that definition is, addiction is a sickness in the brain that makes people think they need alcohol or drugs to feel okay, but then they don't act like themselves. And they need to get help in order to be okay. There is a digital storybook, and then there's the 7 C's. And I'll just tell you those real quickly, and you'll see it on the site, because on the site, another family activity on the site, you can hit on each one of those 7 C's, and Carly will explain what it means in child terms. Then you can color it, the whole quilt, and then you can print it and keep a copy of it, done with the brilliance of Sesame Street, Who Loves Kids. You know, incredible. So the 7 C's, that was my connection to Sesame Street. Number 1, I didn't cause it. I can't control it. And I can't cure it. And those are the 3 C's. And those origins are Al-Anon family groups, the 3 C's. But so that tells kids what they can't do. But you just can't teach kids what they can't do if you don't teach them what they can do. And so, but I can help care for myself by communicating feelings, which we've been talking about, making healthy choices, and celebrating me, my beauty and goodness that I have inside. So, and there was a panel in December, and Sesame Street is actually taking the initiative and are in the process of creating more resources and different resources. I mean, one of the things I asked for is, hey, you know, we need to have another Muppet whose dad is not in recovery and who's living with their grandmother or living in foster care, just to try to make it more inclusive. Sesame Street is great, so we'll put that in there. NACOA is the National Association for Children Impacted by Addiction. And this is COA Week, Children of Addiction Week, where we celebrate the boys and girls of all ages who this has been a part of their life, many of whom are working on healing and getting well. But you know who else we celebrate? All the people in their life that make an incredible difference, like counselors and next door neighbors and relatives and teachers, all that can make such a difference. All the teachers, you know, this morning, you can make a profound difference in a child's life and not ever say the word addiction. Kindness and caring.
Yes.
That kids are excited to go to school and excited to work hard because they just fall in love with that teacher. So we can all be in a spot to do that. So NACOA tomorrow will celebrate its 41st anniversary. And I know that Mallory in the chat box, she's already done this. She's 12 steps ahead of me with everything. NACOA, it's a not-for-profit advocacy organization that never does direct service with kids per se, but creates resources. So they have a couple of different curriculum that treatment centers and schools use. Children's Program Kit and Celebrating Families, or Celebrando Familias, the Spanish version. But the one resource I want everyone to have is if you go to the NACOA website, it's nacoa.org, there is free and downloadable tools for kids. And it's a great, and even if, gosh, if you're that middle school teacher, well, I don't think of anybody now. Hey, would you please print it and put it away somewhere? Because it's a great resource. It talks about ways to talk to kids, how to answer their questions. There's a great bibliography of books for kids and teens. There's the 7 C's. There's information for family members as well. And Wendy was really great. Not as cool as your activity though, but there's an art thing for kids to do there, and also talk about safe people and figuring out who are those people in your life that you have. So that can be a really incredible resource. And the last one, and you mentioned it, is Alateen. So Alateen is a 12-step program run under the auspices of Al-Anon family groups. And there's a book, my favorite Alateen book. This is for teenagers. Favorite Alateen book is a book called Courage to Be Me. And what's so cool about that book, it's written by teens for teens. And also, these days, because of being able to do things virtually, if you go to Al-Anon family groups and pop up Alateen, there's actual virtual meetings for teenagers, always with an adult sponsor, a member, a long-term member of Al-Anon who sits in with the kids. So there's Teen Line. So you can jump on. I was on there just last week, and the incredible stuff that they're doing. So another resource. We can never have enough resources. But I'll tell you, we can have resources, but if we don't build relationships and help people to see that we care, because kids don't care about how much we know until they know about how much we care. And so being able to do that, and in the way that Wendy does that with student assistance and family program that you do, Mallory, and youth education. So just a couple of resources, and use the stuff that works. But you can also, for NACOA, check out Children's Program Kit and Celebrating Families.
I love that.
And you can also reach out to myself. I'm always willing to talk with anyone, email with anyone about different resources and ideas for different things going on in children's lives too. So feel free to reach out too.
I love the concept of, being okay to ask for help, but also I love what you said, Jerry, in that one way to say to kids also is to celebrate their parent. Like you said, like, I think it's really easy to get caught up in, especially when we're in a school and we, there's a lot of vicarious trauma coming our way in this field. And it can be really easy to say negative things or think negative things. But kids are listening. I think that's a really good reminder that they love their parents. They love their siblings, right? They're sick. And they're going to love them no matter what. They're going to love them whether they make a bad choice or not. And that's as they should. They're their family. So we also need to speak highly of those kids, but speak highly of their family members because they hear us, they're listening. And they're not going to trust us to give them these resources if they don't feel safe. I think that's the foundation of everything we've talked about so far today, is allowing that safety so that we can give resources to not only the students, but the families, right? And that they're going to be open and willing to receive them if they feel that we are safe adults and that do what we say and mean what we say and, create that safe space.
Yeah. I always say the 2 most important tools to support children on this journey are understanding and empathy. If you have both of those, you're well on your way.
Yeah. I love that. And one of the things I'll share, because that you just reminded me of that, Wendy, when I send out the email, is Brene Brown has a wonderful video on the difference between empathy and sympathy, which I think is really important for caregivers, especially any of us too in this field that work with young people. Is how do we provide that empathy versus sympathy? And really, what are the tangible differences there? And what do we say when there is some discomfort, or we want to be a supportive person and provide empathy? What are some real tangible language skills that we can use? So I'll be sure to include that as well. I do want to open it up to questions, but I'm curious if either of you have any kind of final thoughts or things you definitely want to say before we open it up for some questions that have come through the chat. So I'll start with you, Jerry. Is there anything you'd like to just final words before we launch into some questions?
I just think I want to piggyback what both you and Wendy said. And I think the other thing too, understanding and empathy, right on target. The other thing is we need to bring back the element of fun in what we do. And I know that we do it, Wendy, you guys do it like no one does, but we just haven't talked about it yet. And then, part of what we want to do is really provide opportunities for kids to be kids. And sometimes it's in a children's program where it's the only place I've ever really had an opportunity to do that. And as with the pandemic and some programs looking at, we have to do less days, or we have to do a little bit less in this arena. Don't let go of the fun stuff, because it's social skill development, and there's that sense of belonging and that sense of connection in all of this. I was taught a long time ago, prevention has 3 components: accurate, age-appropriate information, which we've talked about; skill building, which we talked about; handling feeling, handling stress. But that sense of attachment, that sense of belonging, here is a place that I belong. And I've never heard anybody say it, or I've never seen it in a book, but one of the goals of a program is kids want to keep coming back.
Right.
Even when it's over, so that we can't lose that fun element in all that we do. And it's important for people starting out to do this, or that teacher that's a veteran that's out there, social worker, it's a veteran. This, but with all that's on our plate today, and sometimes trying to do more with less, don't lose that component, just that opportunity. And that's it. I'll leave it there.
Yeah.
Wendy?
I think I have the same thoughts as Jerry, but I'm just hoping that by doing this today, that we shed light on this topic. And I hope that today encourages so many more people to get the support that they not just deserve or need, but that they deserve. Like, I feel like support is deserved. Like, it's not something that we need. You truly do deserve it. You deserve to get these supports and services. And there should be no shame in asking for them or reaching out about them. So I hope, if nothing else, more people will get help.
Thank you for that. So I do want to allow a couple minutes for anyone to put questions. You have 2 options. You're welcome to put them in the chat. You can also put them in the Q&A. I do have one that came through that I'll start with, but we do have 15 minutes. So I encourage you to ask your questions, because it's rare we have 2 experts like this in the room virtually.
Wendy's going to answer.
Someone asked, have either of you had any experience working with animals in terms of like service animals or therapy animals, in terms of helping kids express hard feelings or working to communicate feelings? Who wants to go first? Wendy, go ahead.
I'll just say that we don't have animals at Caron that we specifically work with, or service animals, but I've been in the school system for many, many years as well. And there have been many times, and typically they're after traumatic events, but they do bring service animals in, and it's just a different layer of protection for those kids to open up in a way that they might not have before. Even if it's just sitting with the pets, even if it's just cuddling with the pets, it feels good. right? And so I think more and more schools are starting to incorporate that into like their daily days instead of just bringing them in for certain reasons and purposes, making that a part of their curriculum almost.
Mhm.
So I think there's a lot of value in working with service pets and getting them involved too.
Yeah. Jerry, have you had an experience with that?
I have. So during my career, I spent 7 years at Sierra Tucson, a treatment center in Arizona, and we did equine therapy with kids. And
Mhm.
I'll tell you, I thought this was going to be the biggest crock of all. And, I'm scared. I'm going to get kicked. Something's going to happen. And I'll tell you, it took a couple weeks. The power of horses.
Mhm.
And we would go through this process where kids would interact with a horse. And for some, it wasn't until the kids got in touch with their feelings and their emotions, and it changed. And
Mhm.
the love and the interaction was huge. I became a believer. That stuff really works. And then, at the Betty Ford Center, we've always had a couple of dogs. And so we would have the dogs come, and one of the dogs, and it would come and spend time with the kids.
Mhm.
And it's amazing that the dog could just sit there and we're in group. We're sharing our big feelings in group. And the dog would get up and go right next to the kid that was having fear or dealing with
Mhm.
hurt or confusion. So,
Yeah.
animals,
Mhm.
spiritual. And I think our solutions need to be spiritual. So yeah, the animals work really well. And again, I thought horses, nah, unbelievable some of the stuff. And kids who would really be closed off until we got to the horses.
That's interesting. It's fine. I was walking into a school. It was actually Halloween, which I hadn't thought about. It was like the Friday before Halloween, and I was walking into, it was a high school. And as I'm walking in, there's these two golden retrievers sitting like
Mm.
in the middle. It must have been like lunchtime. All the kids were skirting around, and they were dressed up for Halloween. And everyone, the kids were just walking by petting. There was some like laying on the ground with them. There was
Mhm.
some dressed up to match the dog, in a witch outfit or whatever it was at that time. And it just brought a smile to my face, that the kids didn't have to interact, if they didn't want to, or they were allergic or, whatever the situation was. But just to watch the students walk by and engage with that animal if and when they wanted to, was really powerful. So I appreciate that question, because I think it's just another example that you both shared of different ways that we can try lots of different things, because we don't know what's going to help each family or what's going to be the thing that they latch onto or the thing that's going to be the most helpful. So just another tool in our toolbox there. So it's not necessarily a question, but you guys can comment on this if you feel that someone also mentioned that, when you were talking about fun, Jerry, that it's also important for us as adults in their lives to show children that it is possible to have fun without substances, specifically alcohol, kind of just culturally, and just a good reminder that we need to show children that it's possible to have fun without substances, and that that's not necessary, because that's not always the message they're receiving in terms of media and culturally.
Mhm. Yeah, I
So
think
true.
it is true. And as much as we our teenagers specifically act as if they don't hear us, our kids do hear us and they see us, right? So
They
we
watch
want
us.
they
Yeah.
do. And we want to model the behaviors that we hope to see in them. So that's very important.
Yeah. Jerry, what were you going to say there?
We do an activity sometimes called rad ads. And what we'll do is we'll have volunteers cut out all different kind of advertisements for alcohol, especially.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we'll sit as a group and say, okay, what's going on in this ad? But now let's add our experience. How is our experience different compared to what the advertising is? And what are the messages that are just so erroneous? And so to piggyback on what someone put in the chat, and you're really right on, let's show people of all ages, you don't need to have alcohol or drugs in order to have fun.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely unnecessary. But we try to unpack the ads and show the hypocrisy, because it's nowhere near the experience of those boys and girls and teenagers who have a loved one hurt by substance use disorder.
Yeah, that's a really great point too, just to also give them that space to say that, right? Like, because I think of kids, they're seeing these ads, right? If you watch the Super Bowl, you're seeing the ads, you're driving down the road, you're seeing the ads, right? And it's illuminating a side that maybe they don't agree with in terms of substances. So I love that just as a conversation starter, of what do you see in that ad? How is that different from your experience with substances? I love that. I have a couple more questions. One is a woman who says that she works with a lot of teens who are impacted by parental substance use, and that she finds that there's a lot of anger with them towards their family. She uses kind of a roller coaster, a way to talk about how it's normal to have ups and downs and feelings with your families, that they love them, but they're angry with their actions. But do you, either of you have any other specific or ideas for addressing that specifically for teens?
I think you just kind of address it how it is. It's okay to feel that way. Like, validate them and feeling that way. Like, don't try to change their feelings on it. But I also love doing activities that show just how important their family members are. Like trying to remember the great person that they are underneath all of that. Because like you said earlier, it's a disease and it's, that's not them, right? And trying to get them in the mindset of realizing that is really important. So just trying to remember all of like the wonderful times that can still be and have been before that are super important, but validating that feeling like, yes, I get it. I understand it.
Yeah. Jerry, do you have any suggestions specific for teens?
Sure. I mean, the one thing, and again, we go back and look at, here's the person and there's the disease, or another way to show that. Let me stand up here, see if I can do this. or here I'm the disease, and look what I do to a person. Look how I just really control their lives. I control what they're thinking about. I control their actions, and show that it's a powerful visual. And and like Wendy said before, great activity for patients to see, for family members to see. But after we do that, what we do next is give them a piece of paper with the words "Dear Addiction." What do they want to tell the disease? You want to write a letter? If you don't want to write, that's cool. You don't have to write. Do you want to draw a picture? And just really look at, here's how I feel about the disease, because it's perfectly okay for them to be angry. I get it. They're disappointed. It doesn't make sense. But also to think about being angry at the disease as well. Both of those.
Yeah.
And that might be a way to get at some of that.
Yeah, I like that because, like you said, that's a way to separate those two things, right? The person, I think that leads to what you both were saying, the person over here, the disease over here. Can we help separate those two things, that they can coexist in separate lanes, that we can still love that person, but we can really hate this disease?
Yeah.
And there's times I hate both of them.
Yeah, and that's okay.
That's okay
but
too.
being able to address that somehow.
Yeah, and being able to hear that, right, as a person who works with children, instead of trying to fix it, because I think that's sometimes our default of, you don't really hate them, right? You're just mad at them. But I think that's a really great way of saying, like, you're mad at the disease, but you can also be mad at them, right? They're a human being, and human beings make mistakes. They provoke feelings in other people with their actions. Yeah. So along those similar lines, if we have a teen who has a parent or genetically has that predisposition or has watched a parent suffer, but they are using substances themselves, how can we help them make the connection between their current choices with substances and that genetically they're more predisposed to substance use disorder? She says, I hear a lot of talk about the progression of disease, but I'll hear kids say, I'm never going to be like them. I'm never going to make those same choices, but seemingly they're making similar choices. Any suggestions on that, or how to bring that up? It's a hard one.
Well, I think, and we're talking about teenagers here.
Yes,
so,
correct.
My thought is, I want to do a genogram. I want to put up on the board, a whiteboard or somewhere, a flip chart.
Can you explain what a genogram is, Jerry, just for those who might not know?
Let's go back and look at our families. Let's look at my mom and dad. Then let's look at their parents, and where are the origins of this disease? And sometimes seeing that visually and seeing that it goes back and looking at sometimes that's something that gets passed along. And again, I don't want to you can't scare teenagers or you can't change their behaviors, but I'll tell you that one of the things that is really important to tell teenagers, okay, you're drinking, so that's a risk, and it's a risk, and we got to be careful of our risky behaviors. But I also want to tell teenagers that, here are some of the really bad warning signs of your drinking or you're using drugs. Kind of like when I'm driving the car and that red light comes on. Hey, you know what? Things are about to get really crazy unless I do something about that. And the two things that I would always tell teenagers to be looking for, one is tolerance. That it's kids that drink an incredible amount of alcohol, and that's one of them. But the other one is blackouts. That as an adolescent, if I'm drinking alcohol and I'm starting to have blackouts, that boy, those are even more warning signs that what I'm doing is at risk. So the genogram can help them to see in a way other than talking. Look at it up on take a look at this. But even, okay, so you're taking a risk, and we know this runs in families. We also know that recovery runs in families too. But hey, here's some warning signs, and this is where things are right now.
Yeah.
I was going to say something very similar, but also adding to that, talking about the fact that, their parents had those same warnings, right? So you're getting these warnings, but your parents also had these warnings. And so maybe they chose to ignore the warnings, and this is what happened. And just explaining to them, like, what would happen if you chose to ignore these warnings as well? Like, could you end up in the same spot?
Yeah, or maybe they
don't
were
know.
lacking interventions, right? I think, again, we've come some ways in terms of talking about these, destigmatizing it. And I think we have a generation of kids who are much more able and willing to talk about feelings and, mental health and behavioral health topics, which leads me to believe we're going to be okay in the future as we walk this road. But yeah, I think that's so important, Wendy. Like, maybe your parent wasn't given an intervention, and I'm here trying, right? I'm trying to give you some intervention. And I think someone wrote in the chat that I think is really powerful too, is that there's that generational trend of how we utilize alcohol, right? Or how we handle uncomfortable feelings, and, helping kids maybe identify some of those through the genogram as well, right? How do we handle feelings in this family? What are the messages, whether that's verbally or subtly, that have been in our family related to discomfort and feelings and vulnerability, and, is using substances a way to change some of that, can be, that, kind of those reasons behind that use can be really important. So I appreciate that. It's 1:58. We're almost at our time. So I just want to, I thank you all for putting questions in the chat. I think it's been really, really helpful. I added some notes of things to include in my email to you of things that have come up. So look for that email for me. I will be sure to send all of these resources your way. You will then also have my email address. You are welcome to connect with me, with Wendy, with Jerry, for future questions or things that have come up. But I just want to round out by first and foremost thanking Wendy and Jerry for sharing your wisdom with us, sharing your stories, helping us feel not so alone in this work with kids, erasing stigma one day at a time. And I want to thank, again, Lauren and Jay Springer, as well as the Berks Opioid Settlement Fund for allowing us to provide this webinar for free for all of you. So I thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. I hope you enjoy the rest of the week celebrating COA week, and I hope that you use today as a catalyst to go home or to go back to your school today or tomorrow and open these lines of conversation. So thank you all. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to potentially seeing you next month at our next webinar. Thank you.
Thank you.